Hey guys, for those of you who are newer and haven't been around for the years that I've been loading tutorials bit by bit here, I'm going to go over quickly just the basics of using digital backgrounds, how to extract your subject, and how to blend them in. And then I'm going to briefly go over lighting as well, which is important when you're shooting for composites. So I'm just gonna, this was somewhat of a recent background that I made. So I'm just gonna pull it up because I had the image that I chose. Now, something that you will be doing that I don't always do because I need images for advertising is shoot specifically for this background. So you will do that. And when I don't, I have to use other techniques to try to work with the lighting, and sometimes I just have to settle. But for the most part, when you look at a background, you're going to say, where is the light coming from? So you know how you're going to shoot your subject. In this case, you see there's a light source here. So you want to make sure that you have a light source above your client, which could be natural light, just shooting, in a semi shaded area with the light above. So, during the day, early afternoon, or in a studio, you'd want to have the light source here. And then you'd probably want to have some nice, big, soft softbox here to create light for the front of the face as well. That's, again, something that when you look at digital backgrounds, and I'll go over a couple of them so that you can become familiar with it, that's really important to do. So here's my example of when I have an image that I did not shoot for the background. It's going to make my job a little harder. One, because this I shot at an aperture that's wide open, which when you're shooting for your backgrounds, you generally want to shoot around 4 to 5. I'd say 5. Your f-stop 5. Otherwise, your edges will be very soft and you'll have to work with them. So if you're taking notes, your first step is check for lighting. Then and make sure, not check for lighting, but get the lighting direction that you need, and then make sure your camera settings are going to be set to 5, and then adjust the others as needed to create the image you want. Here, again, I liked this image. I'm not going to have a shoot to put a child in my fairy rock background to advertise it, so I'm just going to use this. So here is the selection tool that you should be familiar with. And before we get into this, if you're not familiar with this, you probably need to do some Photoshop 101. I do have a Photoshop 101 as part of a compositing bundle that I offer. I believe there may be a Photoshop 101 in the group. That is where you don't even know how to start a document. You don't understand layers at all. So if you're not familiar with this tool here or layers, you probably don't want to watch this. I will go through and instruct what I'm doing, but I'm just saying that you might be like, what are we doing? Okay, so this is the select tool. I'm going to hit select subject. It's probably going to select them as well. And so I'm going to grab my negative selection and remove the other girls from the selection. I'm just going around the selection that I don't want in the selection. Okay, and then I see it didn't grab this part of her skirt. And again, you can make your life a lot easier when you shoot for the background. So if you're having sessions and the position that you need. So let's say you decided you want this background. The general rule for most backgrounds, including mine, is you want to be at eye level of your subject to make the perspective right. But if check the background and make sure that it's not, I don't generally do any backgrounds where they're raised or too low. I try to make it as easy as possible for photographers. So the general rule of thumb is the perspective is going to be eye level with your client, unless your client's a newborn. But so keep that in mind as well. If I was above her and she was looking up at me, that would look weird. Because the perspective in this backdrop would not match. And I'll go through that when we paste her in there. So I'm going to hit select and mask. Now, here are my settings for when I select and mask a subject. I don't know why that keeps doing that. So if your view doesn't have this red background, just click your view up here. And you can choose overlay mode, and you can choose your color. This is the easiest for me. If you have your own preference, that's fine and dandy. And then I bring my opacity down to 66 so I can see the background and as I extract. I have a feather of between 1 and 2 all the time. And then I have an output settings of new layer with layer mask. This is the Refine Edge tool. I never use the Refine Hair. I'm waiting for them to improve that. I was excited to see it, but just like most beta things, it doesn't always work right away. So what I'm doing here is the size of the brush, there's no rule, but mine is this. I'm going to make it at a size where I can comfortably go around the edge and have half of the selection in there and half of the non-selection in there. That way I'm telling the system what I want to keep and what I don't want to keep. And what I mean by that is if Photoshop sees that the main selection is green and reds and yellows, it's looking at the whole data here. When I go around it, as you see right there, it's going to try to pull in the similar colors and remove the non-similar colors, or even focals, different focuses. So if it sees that something is a little blurry, it might remove part of it because it doesn't match the overall data it has for the main selection. So, okay. If you see, you can work in here if you want to add back. Like I just grabbed this, the quick selection tool, and I pressed the plus because a little part of her vine wasn't in there and I want it in there. And I'm just gonna go back to my Refine Edge tool. And just try to make it as good as possible. It's never, ever, ever, ever going to be perfect here, okay? But you can get it to a point where you make your life easier once you get that extraction done. So you hit OK. And here's the new, when I said new layer with layer mask, here it is. Now you can see there's parts of this are going to need to be cleaned up. That's not a big deal, and it's normal. If you're like, I can never get a perfect extraction, that's fine. Especially, like I said, when I'm not shooting for a background, I'm going to have extra work because I didn't control the settings for that background. So now I'm just going to take this, I'm going to duplicate the layer to my fairy rock background, and then I'm going to start moving around. Now, when I was talking about perspective, if she was looking up, imagine she's looking up at the camera, that would look goofy. If I'm squatting down, you may be able to work it while she's looking downward with her eyes. You may be able to make that work a little bit, but generally a straight on eye level shot will be the best for you. So here's what I do when I start refining my edges. I go and add a solid color layer behind the subject, and then I usually try to find a good color where I can see what I need to clean up. So I just added solid color and picked a lighter color, and now I'm going to go back to this layer, but this layer mask, and I'm going to grab my brush, and it's going to be a little bit hard, and it's going to be at 100%. And you see here, it's black, okay, which means we're removing. And I'm just first going to clean up any stragglers that stayed with the mask that I can see here. Okay. And then I'm going to go around and just clean up the edges. Now, the reason I'm not at 100% hardness is because that won't look natural anyway. If you have a super crisp edge, you will notice that your pictures look like stickers. You can avoid that by not using a hard brush, by shooting at the right aperture if you're shooting for it. And then I can show you a couple other techniques right after this of softening the edges, which one includes a manual blur, or another, which is a favorite, and usually I combine both, is the mixer brush. Okay. She had some sparkles on her here, so you're going to see that in the selection. And in this case right here, where it's like part of that hat was like wiry, I might not even include that. I just made my brush a little harder, and what I'm just going to do is make this edge a little harder so that it just looks like it's part of the hat. This part is just a leaf in the hat. Then I'm going to go back to my black. And some of this stuff, where if you can't get it perfect, you may not even have to, because look, See how we can see all that? We can't see it there. And I'm not saying leave it in that condition, but if you cannot get it perfect, before you trash it or get upset or whatever, scream into a pillow, just put it on the background and see how much work you really need to do, because you might be able to work with it, blend it, and it only you know about it. Only you know that it wasn't perfect. Okay? Right there, I just used my white brush, and I'm just painting back in to the section of her little vine. But if I got fed up with this, I could just go, you know what? She doesn't have a vine. Voila. You know, doesn't have to be perfect. It's your image. So, the next thing that I'm going to do here is this edge of her arm. I just hit X. That goes between white and black. White fills, black takes away. I just put the white back on because part of her arm is kind of low opacity removed from the selection. That could just be because she had all that glitter in the system was having a hard time making that connection. So I'm okay with this for now. And as you can see, I did have some light in this original image that came from above, so that this works. But let's say you didn't, and you're like, man, I really love this image, but I want to make this light work. Well, this is where a little bit of creative resources can help. I would usually add an inner shadow, and I would put it in color dodge mode, or color dodge, and I would choose like the closer to the color of the light up here. And then here, this angle, you point that towards where the light's coming from. Here is your opacity, how strong it is. And then this is your size, so you can soften that light and you can create distance with that light. So you can mimic that light setup if you didn't shoot for the background. And here's a little difference, gives you a little bit of magic. And now you can right click that layer and hit create layer, and now you can brush off that shadow from other parts of her, like down here where you might not want it. Okay, that's just a little tip for those who love some of their images but they didn't shoot them for the background. Or if you are creating a magical background, you can use that technique for like superheroes and glowing princesses, that kind of stuff. So now I'm adding a layer under here because a really important part of compositing is shadows. So I'm going to make sure that my brush is soft. And for the shadow color, I'm going to pick the darkest color I see on this rock. So I'm holding Alt down. I'm selecting that color. That's going to be my shadow. I'm going to put this in multiply mode. And I'm going to make the darkest parts of the shadows right underneath her, because that's the way it works. If you see anything closest to the object it's touching has the darkest shadows. Now I'm going to bring my opacity way down to, like, right now it's 27. There's no right or wrong, and I'm just going to lightly let that kind of blend out softly. And then I noticed part of my shadow went outside this rock, and so I'm just going to take it off with the eraser. And now her bottom's good. And now I'm going to do the same thing under her legs. But I'm going to start with the 27%. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm pretty lucky with her coloring, but what you're going to want to do is blend for your background. So let's say that she's too dark or she's too light. We can go through and add curves layers. So let's say it was too bright where we shot her. Let's say this is what it looks like and we want her to blend. You can add a curves layer and you can bring the shadows down. And another thing you can do is bring the highlights down when you're bringing those shadows down if you want to lessen that intensity. And then you can also create matte shadows if it matches the shadowing in the image. So there's a bit of a matte effect to this image. pulling this up just a little bit can help it blend a little better. Okay. Another thing that you might want to use is color balance. So when you're looking at color balance, you want to look in the shadows and see, and you'll get familiar with this. It's not easy at first if you're not used to it, but you'll look and you'll try to see what colors are in the shadows in here in this image and what colors are in the highlights. So what you can do if you're not sure is you can just put this clip button to your subject. This is the clip. This clips your layer to your subject. And now I have to clip the other since I unclipped it to show you that. So go into shadows and go, what would it look like if it had a little more cyan in there? Does that flow, or a little bit more warmth? No, the cyan looked better. Does green look better? No, it looks like it's a cooler, there's cooler shadows here. So you're like, okay, I know the cyan looks good, so now I'm going to go towards the other cool colors and see how that looks. Highlights. You could take a peek and look. Does that look like yellow? Looks like yellow in the highlights, maybe a little bit of green. Push a little bit of green in there, a little bit of yellow, and then I'm gonna get a little closer so you can see. It doesn't look like a big change, but it is. Another thing you can do is, let's say her dress wasn't the green that you wanted it to be, or it didn't flow with the background. You can go into filter, camera raw filter, and then choose your color mixer, and then go to the hue layer, and then you can change the hue of your colors in here to match the colors in your scene. Again, hers just so happens to be that green yellow, but let's say there was more green, more greens in the yellows. We could just go to the hue, slide that over, hit OK, and we've added more greens to her yellows. Okay. Once you get your person where you want them and extract it, and then you want to clean it up and get it ready, here's what I recommend. Control-Alt-Shift-E. Control-Alt-Shift-E. That is just a shortcut for Stamp Visible. What that does is it doesn't flatten this, because if you mess something up here, you won't lose all of this, especially if you flatten it, save it, and then close it. You won't have your the snapshots or anything that you've saved along the way. So then there's two methods to blending your edges in a little better. The first one is you can go to your, I got too much stuff here, manual blur. Photoshop. Come on, manual. And it's somewhere down here. It's usually down here. I think they got rid of something here. My computer shut down last night, so something's probably been... Let's edit this. Let's find the blur. If you guys see it and you're not saying anything... Just kidding. Here it is. It's the smudge tool. It's already there. So let's go to my smudge tool. That's not my smudge. Oh my gosh. Did you guys see it? Because I feel like there it is. Listen. Photoshop's just making me show you, if things go wrong, how to work through it. So now we've got your blur tool. And if you don't have the blur tool in there, hit those three dots, right click, hit edit toolbar, and then you can find it and add it to your toolbar like I was going to do, but apparently I already have it there. And oh, I just moved back to, where was it, guys? Oh, Lord, here, blur. Now we're back on the blur. Strength about 27 is good. Now, I'm going to Control J this, because here's why. When I put this blur on this edge, I'm going to go around the whole thing. And then I'm probably going to reduce the opacity just a little bit. And another thing you can do if you have a super sticker looking background is this. Might be even easier. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, put it around 2.5. Add your layer mask, Control I to invert that mask. Grab your white brush, brush it on the edges. You see, there's some of these edges it's not going to be necessary for, because again, if you don't shoot for it, then you don't have those crispy edges. But apply this, you can see some of the selection. Like, I would work on this longer, guys, if you guys weren't watching me. Around the edges, and now I would take that all the way down and then just pull it up maybe to 30%, and then you've got a nice little blend. Then Control Alt Shift E again and go to your mixer brush. Here you want this off. There's nothing here, it looks transparent, and you want this brush with the slash through it. And then my flow, 26% is good. And then around your crispy edges, just brush briefly to blend. Okay. Get those crispies to blend. And then it's subtle, but the eye likes it. It doesn't look like a sticker when you work that way. Okay? And now the thing I would do is Control J, and then I would go into filter, camera raw filter, and I would make global adjustments to the whole thing. So I would maybe bump up that exposure, reduce the highlights, maybe add a little warmth, add a little texture, just a little bit. Maybe add a little bit of luminance for glow. And that way it's applying to the whole image, so it helps it blend overall, color-wise. Okay? So I'm going to go through a couple other backgrounds so we can look at the type of lighting. And then I'm going to try to find a subject with hair that needs extracting, so I can show you how to deal with that as well, because I know that that's an issue, and I've got actually more than one tutorial on it, but I'll try to combine it with this to make it easy. So if you followed along, how would you light for this scene go? Yeah, so this obviously the main source is the fire. You would want to either have them looking into you could have them looking into a flashlight if you want. My preference would be like maybe a gridded softbox, or even a softbox pulled back a little. If you have a snoot, if you use off-camera flash, it doesn't matter what you use. It matters that you create light on their face coming from here. And if you can warm it with a color gel, even better. But if not, no big deal. You can add a color balance layer. You can add a hue saturation layer. You can add color adjustments to make that light warm. But at least you've lit for the image. Here's an example of somebody I did not shoot for this background. I placed him into this background, and he faced a soft box this way. But he was pretty well lit for the purpose of creating overlays. So I had to add the shadowing back here to make it work for the scene. And as you see, I added the inner shadow here to bring the reality of that light over. So that's something you could do for a scene like this, is add your inner shadow. After you light for it, you do want it. And let's say you found a picture, you love it, and you didn't light for it. That's okay too. I do it all the time. Add a curves layer to brighten their face. For instance, we can try to make her look like she was sitting there. Not really sitting there in the air, but I'll show you what I mean. Inner shadow. Now we're going to change this color dodge to a warm yellow. Warmer, bright. And we're going to say, point it towards the firelight. So now we've got the light pointing on her. You can change the size here. You can make it a little bit more colorful if you want. Okay. And now look, she's glowing. It looks like, she's more part of the image. And also what we could do, Like I said, if you didn't take a picture for it, we've got light coming from here. Let's try to get rid of that light. I'm going to take some of those highlights down. Now I'm going to Control I, and I'm just going to paint that adjustment to the area that I want it to go to, which is on the top of her hat, because I don't want it to look like there was light there. Top of her hat, side of her body. I want it to look like she's being lit from the side. Okay. And I'm going to add another one, and I'm just going to pick a color from her hat, and I'm just going to paint it there because with higher opacity, I'm going to paint it there because I don't want that big bright shine. And now I can add a color balance layer to her to warm her up a bit. I'm going to give her in mid-tones, and then I'm going to go into highlights too. Get her nice and warm. And then I'm, last but not least, going to add a little bit of a curves layer to her. And don't worry about how this looks, because I'm going to Control I. Ooh, that's too much. I'm going to bring the opacity down on it. I'm just going to, if she was that close to the fire, it's going to be a little brighter. Okay. And then let's make her greens or her yellows a little more in line with the overall image, even though that works in my opinion. Just applying what we just went over. Let's go into hue. Let's go to the yellows and make them a little more green. And then let's also go into the yellows and saturate them a little more. And let's bring the luminance down, hoping it doesn't really affect her skin too much. Bring the luminance just a tad up. Let's see how we're looking. Yep. So we've got a little more green to fit the scene. And you can see, obviously, this is not, I wouldn't put her there, but I could add a chair there and she could be there. It would make sense, but you get my drift. So before all of these adjustments, she didn't blend. And now with those clipped, she does. Okay. Again, here's a really popular one. People are a lot of times, how do I light for this? Literally in front of a window. A bright window is going to be your best bet because you need that light to be coming from the back. And then you'll just, if they're reading a book, you could put an LED light in there to make it glow and make it magical. But most importantly, you want that soft, natural, diffused light to be coming from their back. Again, if you didn't light for it, you can always... I know you're probably rolling your eyes by now. You can add an inner shadow, and we'll go create this as a white, and we'll put this up here where the light's coming from. And you can add your inner shadow. And another thing you can do if it's too much, which I would do this in this case because it's a softer image, right click and hit create layer. You can go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and you can soften that even more to help it fall around her a little more naturally. Okay. And then once you get these basics down, which is the extraction. Well, first is know where the light source is. This one it's behind, this one is the fire, this one is above. Look at your images and say, what am I going to need to do to shoot for this? If you don't shoot for it, that's still okay. As we went through, learn how to use the tools and the basic tools in Photoshop to create the illusion that they were shot for this or they're there. So, the inner shadow is part of these effects here, which I use drop shadow, I use inner shadow, I use inner glow sometimes. Play with them. And then these color adjustment layer adjustments, adjustment layers. It's been a long day, guys. I've been up since 5 a.m. Go through them if you're not familiar with them, because I use pretty much every single one of these except for that one. Color balance is one that you'll use a lot. Hue saturation. Another good one for images, especially when you're doing animals or anything with a lot of blacks or a lot of whites. Selective color. And this, applying it to your subject, it's if you're like, man, I did everything right, but it's still not working, usually it's your blacks or your whites that don't match or fit the scene. And that's kind of like what we did with the color balance layers, where we're like, what's in the shadows, what's in the highlights. Same thing here. What's in the blacks? Are the blacks cooler? Are do they have more magenta in them? And as you see them change in your subject, look around in the background and see if that looks like it's matching. Same thing with the whites, and this can be used for compositing or just your regular portrait workflow. If you're having issues with skin tone, you can go through and for the highlights on the skin, you can go through and make changes to the tones of the whites. And I use this one almost every single time I have a subject with a white shirt I'm going into a different background. The white shirt usually has too much blue or too much yellow. So when you go in and you go to selective color, you're probably going to use either the cyan or the yellow to help it match. So keep that in mind as well. Quickly, I'm going to find somebody with hair to go through that. And then hopefully that'll bring it all full circle where you feel comfortable starting with compositing. If you are at a point where you're like, I love this, I love putting my clients in here, but you want to go further, you want to create backgrounds, I have a full compositing bundle. It has, I believe, over 20 tutorials. They come with stock images, they come with the backgrounds. If it's just a blending tutorial, if it's I show you how to shoot and create backgrounds, how to create backgrounds with no images. So it's an advanced course for people who want to keep mastering the craft of compositing. And if you're interested in that, you can go to my website, taramapes.com/masterclasses, and it's the compositing bundle. But let me find one with hair real quick, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so here we go. Sample girl. I have one with hair that's, a little wild. So I'm going to do the same thing. Select subject. And then I'm just going to hit selected mask. Again, I'm not using this. I don't like it. They need to work on it. So I'm going to go to my refine edge. I'm going to have my same settings. Feather between 1 and 2. And I'm just going to go around even the open spaces. The system is smart enough here to remove, when I touch in there, to keep the hair, but remove that background from there. So you can see, if you watch closely, it's removing. See these, there's still pink behind her hair. Might be hard to see with this color. If you want to see it like this, maybe. See all that pink? See it being removed? Now, you want to do that all around. Looks like they forgot this part of her shirt. You see that? Removing the pink there. Okay. Now, there may be some color casting from the pink on her hair that may not work in backgrounds. I don't recommend using decontaminate colors because when you use it, it's going to add this weird, messy artifacts around the selection, and it's awful. So instead, I'm going to hit OK, and let's put a solid white background behind her. And there's a little bit, you can see the color casting here, D. So you'll work on those types of things the same exact way that we just blended. But for the first part, I want to say, did it do a great job on that hair? It did a really, really, really good job. Now, a lot of people have problems with the hair when they put them on a background where, let's just throw her into the fairy rock one so we can see against green. Okay. I'm not blending, so don't look at it like, oh man, it's awful, because it is. The point in showing you this is she's got the pink color casts. Sometimes you'll see like discolored hair around the edges that it doesn't work. So in this case, I would go and add a hue saturation layer, and I would clip it to make sure I'm only making changes to her. And then I would make sure that that's pulling magenta, and if it's pulling reds, I just know that it's going to affect the skin if it's pulling reds especially. So I'm going to have to create it and then brush it on. But we can change the saturation here of the reds. We can even change the hue if we wanted. So now that I've done that, I'm going to Control I. And I'm working on her hair separately from her shirt. And I'm just going to paint it around the edge of her hair. So now there aren't those color casts of pink in her hair. And then I'm going to do the same thing for her shirt. Reds. You can see that when we paint that on, that'll take care of it. I also want to show you the selective color on the white in this case, just so you can see it in action. So I'm fixing color casts. Now, a lot of people say, what do you shoot on when you're shooting for a digital background gray? Gray, 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 gray. It's not a dark gray. It's a light gray. Nah, it's a medium gray. I think it's savage gray. Maybe it's thunderstorm. Whatever. It's gray. And the reason I do that is because it won't cause color casts like a green screen. And then and I don't use white or black backgrounds because you would think, oh, the extraction would be easier, but not really. First of all, white reflects light, black absorbs light, so it can affect your lighting control. But also, if they're wearing a white shirt and you're shooting them on white, your extraction life is going to be awful. And vice versa. If they're wearing a dark shirt or they have dark hair and you're shooting them on black, the system is not going to be able to distinguish between the selection you want and then what's behind them. So I go with neutral all the time. And then I wanted to show you, now that you can see that hue saturation worked on that, then we can also use selective colors for whites, and it's going to affect the whole white part of the shirt. We can add cyans, we can add magentas, we can add yellows. And then we can also remove some of those, like if you have a blinding button-down shirt, they just really wanted to wear that bright white shirt, this is a really good trick. So these are all easy adjustment layers that you can use to help blend with your subject. And again, I really wish the match color was working, because it is not the magic tool by any means whatsoever, but it gives you a good idea of what changes need to be made before you start. So when you do it and it actually works, which again, I'm just baffled it's never not worked, but again, that's Photoshop for you. Search the group for match color and you'll find it and you'll be like, wow, that's crazy, but it helps you identify what the difference is between the background and your subject and how you're going to blend that. And when you do it enough times, then it starts helping guide you. Your eyes start getting used to it. So let's go back over and make sure that I've covered all the basics for someone who is new to compositing. When you see a background, check the light source so you know what you're going to have to do with your lights, whether you're going to set them up naturally or you're going to do it in studio. If you're going to do it in studio, I recommend shooting it on a gray background, solid background. Make your extraction life easy. Avoid color casts and avoid really hard, long extractions. When you extract, use the select and mask, and then go through and refine the edge of your selection, and then take advantage of the tools like color adjustments and special effects like inner shadows to help blend your subject into the scene. And then when you're finalizing it, using the manual blur tool, the Gaussian blur, and applying those to the edges of your person so that you don't have stickers, and obviously always adding shadows. And I have separate tutorials on shadows here too as well. Just type in shadows. And then merging them all, and then creating global adjustments, and then using the mixer brush slightly to help blend your subject will really help bring your image to life. One last little trick I want to add is, if you did have discoloration up here from lighting or coloring or whatever, and when you're extracting, you're like, man, this part of the hair is white and the rest is normal and it's not supposed to look like that. Something I do quite a bit is I just clip a regular blank layer to them, and then wherever the regular color hair is, I'll pull from that, and then I will paint that color where I want it. So let's say her hair was super light here and the lighting was supposed to come from here. You can just paint the color over the hair, and if it doesn't look like you did. So anyway, I hope that helped. Again, if you're brand new, and you don't understand layers or how to create a document or anything like that, I do have a Photoshop 101 tutorial. I'm not sure if that is still a public tutorial that I have available, but comment it below if you need it, and I'll see where it's at. It also definitely search for the match color. It's not the game changer. It's really not the game changer, but I think it's really important for people who aren't familiar with visually identifying the color differences right off the bat. And I feel like it helps train you get to where you need to be. And then take notes and just start shooting for backgrounds and just practice. It's the most important thing. And again, if you are already at this level and you love compositing and you want to go further and you want to learn how to make backgrounds, or you just want a course that covers a little bit of everything, I do have the compositing bundle course under the masterclass list, and that is always open for enrollment. So click the link on taramapes.com/masterclasses and you'll find the link to the compositing course bundle. So I hope that helped, and until next time, stay enchanted.